Sex, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the speculative interdimensional vehicle, Sex in Space. Its mission, to explore new points of view, to seek out fresh opinions, to boldly go where so many have gone before, and still somehow manage to totally miss the point. Subscribe to Sex in Space, wherever quality podcasts are found.
Hi there, I'm Tim, and welcome back to Sex in Space, here continuing to explore sex across all of its infinite dimensions. I hope you're all doing great. This is episode 27. Look at us go. Whether you're a returning listener, or this is your first plummet down the interdimensional cosmic rabbit hole, it's bloody lovely to have you with us. Buckle up, I hope you bought snacks. If you are loving our content, there are lots of ways you can support us here at Sex in Space. Head on over to sexinspace.com/shop and check out our lovely merch. Our book, The Organ Education Forgot, a little book about the clitoris, is also available at sexinspace.com/book. For the shy amongst us, we have the super accessible downloadable PDF version. And for the out and proud, a fabulous print version for you or your mates. Remember, you can also show support by liking, rating and subscribing wherever you found us. There is more awesome Sex in Space content over on TikTok and Instagram. Our handle is sexinspace.com, all one word. That's sexinspace.com. Now let's get to our incredible interview. Little old me had the pleasure of talking all about vulvas with the lovely Jo Corrall. Jo is the founder of This Is a Vulva, a sex education and vulva acceptance project. Her mission is to teach people what the vulva is. It's not a vagina. And celebrate the diversity in genitalia. Did you know, because I didn't, that when people learn about vulva diversity and see photos and images of vulvas that look like their own, they start to accept their own genitals and feel happier? Who doesn't love that? Jo's got a book, a website, and he's great on the socials too. So let's dive on in. So, hello Jo, thank you very much. Welcome to Sex in Space. Now, we're going to talk about vulvas, but here I am, an elephant in this room a little bit, 40-year-old guy, I'm a dad, what business do I have talking with you about vulvas, but what I'd like to find out is obviously about you and the broader work you do, but also how it is helpful for everybody to understand, the kind of work you kind of do and why. And so, here I am, ready to ask daft questions, no doubt. Looking forward to it. But I've got a little. Questions. No, that's good. But I feel like we're all sort of scrabbling around. Learning all the time, as a husband, as a father of a daughter, and all the rest of it, it's I think it's good information. Let's start at the beginning with what inspired you to start This Is a Vulva.
So I started This Is a Vulva in, I think it was 2016, and I'd been to a big feminist festival called Women of the World, which is now a festival that happens all across the world. And it happened in London, in South Bank Centre. And there was a talk, they were talking about a book that had come out, and the book had been illustrated by a woman who drew lots of vulvas who were doing things in the books. There was vulvas with top hats and dancing canes and doing silly things that. And she passed out a annotated colour by numbers vulva into the audience, so we all took one home. And I put it on the fridge at home, and at the time I was living with 7 other people, men and women, and people would come up to it and just be like, what is this? Or what's that bit? Or I don't think I've got that bit there. And I realised that we were all educated, feminist people in our late 20s, early 30s, and yet none of us, including the women or the people who had vulvas, none of us knew very much about our own genitalia. So I started to do something on Instagram, and it was kind of a bit of a joke to start with, kind of like trying to counteract the number of dicks on the internet by putting some vulvas out there, and then I just kind of kept finding out more and more things that made me realise what I was doing was actually a bit more important than that. So in the UK, there were 9-year-olds who were asking for labiaplasty on the NHS, and labiaplasty is when you cut bits of your vulva off, essentially, to make it more aesthetically similar to other vulvas.
Yeah.
And like at 9, I mean, I grew up in the countryside, but at 9, I'm pretty sure I was still in the garden, like making mud pies and like playing with dolls. I was not thinking about what my vulva looked like and whether it looked wrong or different. There was also a statistic that that going for a smear test was at a 21-year low. A 9-year low, and it was because when they asked people, why do you not go for a smear test, they were saying things like, oh, I think I look wrong, or I smell bad, or I'm just embarrassed about how it looks. And smear tests are such an incredible invention. They're so great. Like, it's such a fantastic way of preventing cervical cancer, and we're not accessing it because we're worried about what we look like. So I thought, okay, this is wrong. We need to know more about the vulva. And we being everybody at secondary school for our sex education. I don't know about you, so I'm 35 and I grew up in the UK. It sounds like you did too.
Yeah.
And we didn't even see a vulva in our sex ed. We got shown the internal system, so like the womb, the vagina, the ovaries. We got taught about periods and sex, but we saw diagrams of penises, but not of vulvas. And it was never called a vulva. It was only ever be called a vagina. And we don't know about our own bodies. And often people find out when they have a baby, is often when a lot of women find out about their bodies. And I just think that's completely unacceptable. So, yeah, that's kind of where it started. And I just put more and more stuff on Instagram and did a lot of research about things. And I started running workshops that I call labia lessons, which is teaching people all about the vulva, but in a very fun and informal way. And it's for anybody, whether you have a vulva or not, and it's all gender inclusive. And then last year I wrote a book called This is the Vulva, and it's got all the information that I know about the vulva, all the information I think people need to know. And crucially, it has about 50 photos of people's vulvas, of different ages, of different ethnicities. And I just think seeing photographs of non-sexualized vulvas is so important, because we just don't ever see vulvas to kind of understand how they are all so different, and but each one is totally normal. I think penises are they're more visible, for one. It's on the front of your body. The vulva is kind of more like under, so it's very hard to look at your own. And I just think we just don't see non-sexualized vulvas. We see vulvas in porn, which have, not always, but have some of them have had labiaplasty, so that they all look the same. Some have been hired specifically on what their vulva looks like. So it's not a very representative sample. It's usually often skinny white women with no pubes as well, which again is a very small percentage of the world. And that's about it. And if you see medical diagrams or drawings, or if you did have it in your sex ed, it would be a diagram, and it would have like very small inner labia. There'd be no asymmetry. There'd be no asymmetry. There'd be no texture. There'd be no colour. You just don't get to see what they look like. And I think for straight women probably see the least amount of vulvas of everybody. Like, straight men will see them, and queer women will see them, and queer non-binary people will see them. But if you're a straight woman and you've never looked at your own, you've probably never looked at a vulva, and you've got one, and we've all looked at all the other body parts that we have, but we haven't looked at something that's such a crucial part of our body. So
Yeah, no,
as you can tell, I'm quite passionate about educating people on it, basically.
No, I think it's really good. Just to interrogate the labiaplasty, or this idea of the designer vagina, or whatever, because it seems, and I think you've, I read your book, and it seems that you've sort of touched on the subject that they're not all bad necessarily. It's the proliferation of them, and the fact it's the fastest growing cosmetic surgery. I don't know if it's globally or in the UK or whatever, but
it is. It's globally.
It feels like, it feels a little bit like the labiaplasty is the sort of symptom of this obviously massive wider problem that no one is getting educated, getting familiar, or dealing with stuff. So yeah, is that kind of, am I right on that one there? Like,
yeah,
it's a modern, it's a very modern thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's definitely very modern. People have had labiaplasty for a while, where it's been not for aesthetics, it's been for comfort. So if you've got quite large labia, then sometimes you can find it they can chafe when you walk, or if you're cycling, or if you're a runner. Some people have had labiaplasty for those reasons. I'm not here to shame anybody that's had labiaplasty. If you've had it for aesthetic or non-aesthetic reasons, your reasons are your own. I'm not going to shame you for doing that. My what I would like to do is to help people like their own vulva, and not want to change it at all in the first place. And if they choose to change it, that's fine, as long as you've got into that with all the information that you can possibly have about what vulvas look like, the variations they come in, the fact that 3/4 of vulvas will have inner labia that protrude, will sort of stick out outside of the outer labia, so that you can see them hanging down. 3/4, that's almost the norm then, isn't it, really? That's the majority of them. But that's the thing that most people find, that they want to reduce the size of their inner labia because they think that that's abnormal. And I want people to know it's not abnormal. If you still want to change it, that's entirely up to you, but it's not abnormal.
That's it.
I've heard stories of quite a few people that have attempted to cut off their own labia with, like, kitchen scissors, for example, and obviously that does not go well. It's extremely painful. There's a lot of blood involved, and that's like the desperation almost, or like the emotion behind that, to take a pair of scissors to your own body with like no anaesthetic is outstanding. And I just think the kind of how people must feel to get to that point is really tough, and it could be stopped. That level of feeling, about that level of revulsion about our own bodies, could be stopped, because there's been studies, I've talked about them in the book, where if you show people photos of a variety of vulvas, they feel better about their own vulva afterwards and feel less likely to want to have labiaplasty. So that's simple. That's literally just showing people photos. That's not even like any kind of big campaign. It's just, let's look at photos of vulvas and understand that, whatever yours looks like, it is not abnormal compared to other vulvas out there. It's so simple.
Do you think then that there is a concept out there, probably of an ideal vulva? Is that something that's kind of been fed in a way out there?
Definitely. I mean, you used the word designer vagina earlier. Like, that is a phrase that people know. and I've used it as a phrase before as well, because people know what you mean, and it comes from kind of a very thin, white-centric, hairless ideal of women in general. Like, that's what, like, the kind of, you know, the people, like, countries like America, Australia, New Zealand, Australia are very white-centric, very, and being skinny is seen as the right thing, and being very feminine, which means you're not hairy, and so the kind of designer vagina that people are hoping for is, it's also, you hear the phrase tucked in a lot as well, so as in like inner labia that sit within the outer labia and aren't seen on the outside. And I think that was what was quite heavily featured in a lot of free porn back when free porn started. So when I was a kid and using the internet, that was what vulvas looked like in porn. They were skinny white women, no hair, and like very small inner labia, and that's what a lot of people want to have done. There are other types of cosmetic surgery you can have on the vulva and the vagina. So there's something called it's often called the husband stitch, which can be done after birth or any time, where you sort of stitch up the vagina to be a bit tighter. Or you can take a triangle of the vagina out and pull it together so it's like a little like a dart that you would have in your clothes. And now there's also something called a labial puff. So as you get older, you have less estrogen in your body, and estrogen is what keeps your skin like plump. So your outer labia can become less plump, basically. So this is kind of like you would have lip fillers for the lips on your face, you can have lip fillers for the outer labia to kind of plump them up. So when you get older, you've still got like a plump vulva. And there's also loads of creams that like are lightening creams, because the hair around your the skin around your vulva can often be darker, so it's about like bleaching that skin. I've also seen things that are almost like a blush to also make it slightly pinker as well if the skin is a different colour. And I mean, all of these things, like, where have they come from? Also what really annoys me is you don't see a penis equivalent. It's the same with things like FemFresh. So there's all these intimate washes for vulvas. You don't need them, for one. They can be quite bad for you. The other thing that really annoys me is you don't see like penis washes. There are no like skin tightening testicle creams. There's no like specific foreskin soap. Like, it's not. I mean, what's sad is that it probably will be invented, because that's capitalism. Probably. But it's these companies producing a problem, telling you that vulvas are dirty, inherently disgusting and smelly, selling you a product, and then they also, a lot of these companies will sell things to treat thrush, and you can get thrush from using like scented products on your vulva. So they're creating the problem, they're selling you something to fix the problem, which will give you another problem, and they're selling you something else to fix that problem. And it's
genius.
So frustrating. It's feeding this idea. It's bloody genius, yeah. But it's feeding this idea that vulvas are inherently dirty and disgusting, and that idea in society is very much alive. Like, I remember being at school, and like that an insult was about being fishy, as in like having a fishy vagina. Like, that was just something that even as 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, we knew that as an insult. Like, where did that come? How did we learn about that? It doesn't make any
it doesn't
sense
make much
to me.
sense. I think a part of this, which sort of fits into what you're talking about, that I found interesting reading your book and then reading more about, was discharge. And I wanted to speak to you about discharge, but then I actually had this slight realization that the word discharge is quite kind of negative in a way. And I wondered if, like, all of those, if it's just, you know, and it's an amazing process, you know, wow, like what an amazing, you know, this self-cleaning, amazing part of the female body. the discharge is it
no,
kind of should be
it's incredible.
celebrated, but just straight off the bat, the fact they call it discharge, I feel like it's already got like a negative connotation to it. You know, if there was another name for it that was, I don't know. I mean, obviously people tend to have a problem with the stuff that comes out of our bodies, but just that word is very charged, like negatively. But I did, talk about some of the stuff that you've done around that acceptance of that as well, normalizing of discharge. If we're going to use that term, let's use it.
Yeah, well, there is also, you could also use the term cervical mucus, but I don't think that sounds much better either. No. The term mucus is just not very pleasant.
It's not.
So discharge, in case anybody who's listening doesn't know, it's produced inside your vagina by your vaginal walls and by the cervix, and it cleans your vagina. It basically, any germs that are inside your vagina, it sort of collects them up and then squirts them out. For the majority of people who have a vulva and a vagina, discharge is a daily occurrence. For some people, it can be that when you stand up, it can drip down your leg. For some people, they might have barely any. It will change throughout your cycle. It will change throughout your life. So as you get older, going through the menopause, you have less discharge. Then you have a thing called vaginal dryness, which is also difficult. So then you have to squirt moisturizer essentially up your vagina to try and change that, because it can be quite uncomfortable. But discharge is just something that I realised I wasn't the only one that realised, but I thought, no one's really talking about discharge. It was something I've always had quite a lot of, I guess, and as a teenager I would constantly be stuffing my pants with toilet roll. I would hate the idea of my friends or a partner seeing my pants at the end of the day, where they're kind of, depending on what the day's been like, whether it's kind of dried and crusty or like wet or creamy, and they looked dirty to me. And sometimes you can get brown discharge, which is where there's a bit of old blood mixed in with the discharge. So that can be like the beginning or end of a period, and then it kind of looks like a brown smear on your pants, and you feel like you want to be like, it's not poo, I haven't shit myself, it's just brown discharge. And it just felt like something that a lot of people didn't like talking about, and also didn't know very much about. So basically I started talking about it. I put a picture of my pants at the end of the day on Instagram. It was one of the most popular things I put on, and then within 24 hours Instagram had taken it down. And I was furious, and I tried putting it up again, and it got taken down again. And I tried to, I went through the process of asking why, but it's with Instagram, it's all very, there's no people. You don't speak to a person. It's, you fill in a form, and then they will reject it anyway. And I never found out why. They said it went against their kind of like sexual rules, which makes me think, I don't think you understand what discharge is. This isn't cum. It's not female ejaculate, it's not male ejaculate. Like, I don't think you realise what this is. And there's also discharge. You can know where you are in your period cycle with discharge, and it does lots of different things. So it can either sort of clog up the cervix to stop sperm coming in, or it can be a different texture, which people say it's like egg whites. So if you kind of like stretch it out between your fingers, it's like egg whites, and that's when you're more fertile. Like, the sperm kind of use it for energy. It's easier for them to swim through. Like, there's all these biological reasons. And in loads of like fertility books, they tell you to like, try and stretch it out between your fingers. And there was somebody else who had a picture of it stretched out between their fingers on Instagram, and that got taken down for sexual reasons too. And again, it's like, Instagram does not understand the vulva, the vagina, the cervix, the discharge, does not understand it. It thinks it's something sexual, and that's not sexual. That's actually health. Like, your discharge is also a really good way of letting you know if there's anything wrong with your vagina. So if you have any infections, your discharge could be frothy or green, or can smell different, or can be orange. Like, it helps you know if you've got an infection.
Yeah.
We don't for anything else. If we were like, I don't know, had snot or phlegm on Instagram, they wouldn't take it down. Or,
Probably not,
or
no.
like a pussy wound, they wouldn't take it down. Like, they're
They'd
signs of
encourage that,
infection
yeah.
too, but it's...
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what I then decided to do, after having not allowed my discharge post back up, and realising from the amount of people that had seen it and had commented and had said things like, God, I feel so normal now that you've shown this. Like, this is what my pants look like. I've always worried. I didn't know what it was. I decided to make a discharge gallery on my website, because I thought, well, I won't take that down, and I'm the only one that controls this website. And I got people to send me photos of their discharge, like of their pants, at the end of the day, and put them all up so that people can have a whole gallery to look through of different discharge, to see whether, to kind of help you understand that your discharge is normal, and to see how it looks, basically.
Yeah.
So it was all healthy discharge, and it's just had the best response. It was probably one of the best things I've done, in terms of like the response of making people feel good. So I even had one woman who was in her 50s, had messaged to say that she's had discharge her whole life, never knew what it was, always thought there was something wrong with her, but was too embarrassed to go to the doctor. And now in her 50s, having seen the discharge gallery, she realises that she's totally normal. And I just think, I'm so fucking proud. What an amazing thing to have done. But two, like, she's in her 50s and she's only just realised that this thing that her body's been doing every day is normal. Like, that's appalling. That is we're doing such a disservice to people by not teaching them about this. Like, discharge should be taught in sex ed at school. And to be fair, it might be now. I don't have kids. I don't know what's really happening in sex ed at schools. I've got a vague idea, but not super detailed. And it's so different from school to school as well, depending on what the teacher wants to say or talk about. I've heard of a teacher who teaches sex ed said she doesn't want to talk about the clitoris because it's too embarrassing to use the word, so she's just not going to teach it. And I thought, oh, right, great. So now you've got a whole, classes of kids don't know about the clitoris because you're too embarrassed to say it. And that's not the teacher's fault. It's because the teacher's never been taught that the clitoris is just another body part that you can just talk about. The society has made it seem too I don't know, sexual, too dirty, too disgusting, too embarrassing.
I mean,
I bet she didn't say this. I bet she would talk about testicles and penises with no problem. But suddenly the clitoris is,
You could give those kids, 5 minutes to have a good giggle about it, and then you'd probably get over it. Yeah.
Exactly. And that is what we did in my sex ed at school. Actually, I think it was a science lesson. We were learning about periods, and we all had to just shout out the words. We had to shout out, like, vagina, ovaries, penis, period. And he just made us shout it out over and over again. We all had a good laugh, and then we got on with the lesson. And, like, that's it. Of course, kids, you laugh when you're embarrassed, and you're embarrassed as a teenager because you're embarrassed about everything as a teenager. Like, we just need to get kids to get past the embarrassment and learn, so that then later on they're not disadvantaged by not realising that their body is totally normal and is doing what it should be doing, and is cleaning itself. Like, literally no other part of our body does that. We have to clean everything except for the vagina.
It is amazing. It is.
Like, it's brilliant.
Yeah. It is really amazing. I think it's really interesting, though, to hear, I guess, some of your success stories, or people that have sort of reached out to you and sort of said the work that you're doing and the impact that it's having. Because I guess the work, I guess, of exposure that you're doing, whether it's the discharge or whether it's normalizing vulvas. It's really, trying to stem the flow, I guess, of a bit of a, barrage of, vulvas in porn, and lots of other stuff in culture. And I think it's interesting that people have an awakening, I guess, at any age, and have these positive reactions is really great. I wanted to ask about, or not ask, but have you just talk through some of the ways, and you kind of have touched on it, that vulvas actually differ. So, I mean, if anyone's kind of listening, you know, we're talking about asymmetry, color, hair, texture, like multitude. I mean, for me, it's like people's body size, shape, hair color, nose shape, the whole thing. I mean, everybody's totally different. I don't know why I would expect everyone to have this perfect lineup of symmetrical, identical genitalia.
Exactly.
It's a weird one.
It's bonkers. It's the one part of the body that we think should be exactly the same as everybody else's, and perfectly symmetrical, and and it's not, and like you just said, like literally every part of the vulva can be different from other people's. So if we start at the top, you've got the clitoris and the clitoral hood. So the bit that you see really is the clitoral hood, and often when people draw a vulva, they'll do like a tiny little sort of P at the top, like a little sort of knob at the top for the clitoris. And whilst that is the case for some people, the clitoris on average is about the third of the length. Sorry, the clitoral hood is about a third of the length of the entire vulva. And that's something that a lot of people don't know or don't see. So you see when people drawing it is very much like a tiny circle, and then there's a huge big gaping vaginal opening, and then some labia, and that's actually really not the case for the majority of people. So the clitoris can be short or long. It can be quite fat and puffy, or it can be quite thin and not very prominent. It can also stick out of the outer labia, so your clitoris can be visible, kind of when if you're not kind of spread open, I guess. Then you've got the outer labia, which can be really quite dark compared to the rest of your skin, or the same colour, or can be quite red and pink, or can be quite kind of purpley. It can be quite puffy and fat, I guess, or it can be very flat. Then you've got the inner labia, and the inner labia are the ones that most people are sort of concerned with, and these can just be there's so much variation. So anywhere between kind of 1 to 10 centimeters long is kind of the average, and that's not that like 1 is the average and 10 is abnormal. Like 1 to 10 is average. If you have labia that are over 10 centimeters long, that's still not abnormal, it's just a bit rarer. They can be completely different on either side. So you can have one, I've got a picture of one person who's got, I don't know, it's maybe like 5 or 6 centimeters long on one side and then nothing on the other. Like that's totally normal. You can have it wider at the top or the bottom. They can be like 93% of labia are wrinkled or kind of textured, and that's pretty normal. If you think it's kind of like quite a bit of skin that has to stretch when if a baby comes out, so then the rest of the time it's going to be kind of wrinkled. The colour can be completely different, so you might have the ends of your labia might be a lot darker than the kind of more closer in with your labia. They can change. I mean, it can change colour when you're aroused. I don't like if you look at a vulva as someone's getting aroused, because very similar to a penis, the blood all rushes to the area and engorges everything, and you can see that. You can see it getting bigger. You can see it getting darker. And then you've got what's called the vestibule, which is inside the inner labia, and that's where you've got the vaginal opening and the urethra and some different glands in there as well. So the urethra is often also shown as quite a big hole on diagrams, and the urethra actually, if you ever look at it, it's more like a tiny slit, but it's so small that like if you were trying to look for it and you were trying to look for this big dot that's on a diagram, you'd just be thinking, oh my god, I don't have one, where am I weeing from? This doesn't make any sense, because it's really small, and it can be anywhere within the vestibule, so anywhere inside there, and it can even be just inside the vaginal opening as well, which is why some people do think that they wee out of their vagina, but it's just because their urethral opening, which is where you pee from, is just inside. And then the vaginal opening, often in diagrams, is quite a big gaping hole, and on some people it can look like that. Mine is like that. It kind of looks like a black hole almost, but on some people it's all very kind of closed off together. So I get quite personal. Sorry.
Don't worry about it.
On other people it's more closed off, and on some people you can kind of see where the hymen has been sort of torn, and some people you can't. Like the hymen is the same. It's just a very thin stretch of skin that it can have different sized holes in, or no holes at all, and it never goes. So that whole thing about like if you've had sex for the first time, you've kind of like broken and lost this hymen. It doesn't go anywhere. Like it hasn't fallen off. It's just sort of at the sides, and it's usually got a gap in that will allow stuff to come in and out anyway. So it doesn't kind of disappear. It's not like a taut drum skin that gets like popped, you know. And if you do have that, like I think it's like 1 in 10,000 or 100,000 people have that, which is like, it's called an imperforate hymen. You have to have minor surgery because discharge won't come out, period blood won't come out. Like you discover it when you're a teenager because you get a real pain because you're having periods but it's not got anywhere to go. So like your hymen is not this kind of bit of cling film over the top of your vagina that gets broken.
Through it.
That's a huge misconception. Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
I knew it was a myth.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I knew it was a myth, and then your book confirmed it, and I was like, the whole concept of virginity is actually a bit of a myth, isn't it? Like that's another story.
It doesn't. Exactly. It doesn't mean anything. It's a social construct. But we haven't got time for that as well as vulvas.
The tools and practical help for people. I mean, I found actually the vulva diversity, the galleries and stuff that you've got in the pictures in the book, the pictures on your website. I found them really interesting, and I learned a lot as well. But because I wasn't sure how I was going to feel, but there's an initial level of shock, I suppose, particularly. You know, as a man, maybe sort of feeling different. There's a sort of unpacking of how I sort of feel about it, but it's not sexual. It's definitely not. It definitely doesn't look or feel like porn, and it kind of draws you in. It's very curious, and once you sort of realize that what you're looking at is this kind of amazing diversity, it just kind of is like, it's actually quite amazing because I don't really, you just don't get that anywhere else.
Exactly.
And I really found that interesting. But so people should go check that out. That's on your website if they've,
it is.
and that's in the book as well. But like in terms of practical tools and resources and stuff like that, like what is the best thing that people should be doing to sort of get on this journey and learn a bit, I guess?
Well, I mean, I don't want to brag, but I do feel like my book is probably the best resource out there for kind of learning about the vulva.
Well
there
done.
are obviously lots of other books, and thank you. So I'm not a doctor. I'm not medically trained. I don't have any qualifications in vulvas. It's come through research. It's come through talking to doctors. The book has been read, edited, and verified by an NHS doctor who is fantastic, and she is at Talks with Dr. Sese on Instagram and Twitter and stuff, and I cannot recommend her more highly. She's just fantastic. The big thing I want to say is that I get so many messages from people with asking me about medical questions. And what I would always say is go and speak to your doctor, because I mean, like I said, I'm not a doctor, and even if I was a doctor, I'm not your doctor. I'm on the internet. Like, I don't know who you are. I don't know anything about your medical history. Doctors are they've seen so many vulvas, like especially with smear tests. Doctors and nurses that do smear tests, they see thousands of them a year, and it's always better to go and speak to a doctor and put your mind at rest than to worry about something and to ask strangers on the internet, because I will help as much as I can, but with anything that's even slightly medical, my advice is always go and speak to a doctor. They are, you might be a bit embarrassed, but they won't be. They'll have seen this, whatever it is, they'll have seen it 100 times before, and I think that's the most important thing. In terms of other places that you could go, I mean, I'm slightly struggling because this is the problem. There isn't very many places where you can learn about the vulva without it being somebody who's trying to sell you something. And like, I'm aware I'm trying to sell the book, but I sell it for £5 because I genuinely want it to be something that's accessible for everybody. And there's a PDF that's £3. So like, it's not, for me, it's not about making money. I just want people to know this stuff. There are quite a lot of different studies, but unless you know exactly what you're looking for, it can be quite tricky. Yeah. I mean, on Instagram there is kind of a big vulva positivity movement, or at least in the little bubble that I'm in, and there's lots of different people.
Yeah, no, I think I've strayed into the same bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good. It's fun. It's a fun bubble to be in. Yeah.
It's a fun bubble to be in. Yeah.
It's a good one. I found some really interesting guys actually, and their spiel is to watch a lot less porn, and I feel that's for another podcast again. And I hope that'll be a really interesting conversation. But I think for a lot of people, you know, there might be some certain expectations that are sort of set in porn that are a little problematic. You know, certain reaches of the internet. I know there's positive porn. There's kind of, you know, there is better porn out there, but there's a lot of shit as well. So
there is, and I think with porn, because I'm in no way anti-porn, and I think porn is very polarizing. People are either like totally love it or totally hate it, and I don't think porn is the only reason why we have this idea of like a designer vagina or a perfect vulva. I think it's also just that all the diagrams we've seen are just very, you know, very small labia, very symmetrical. What I think, I know we're not having this conversation about porn, but I do just want to say, I think with porn, we need to teach people porn is not sex. Porn is not a reality. It's like watching a Bond film. You're not James Bond. You don't have all these gadgets. Your life is not going to be like this, but it's entertaining to watch. Porn, that is not what sex is. That's not what it's going to look like. That's not what the people are going to look like. That's not the sounds people are going to make. But it's entertaining to watch, and I think that's what's important. Is it's let, you know, people can watch porn. That's fine, as long as we're letting people know this is not reality. This is not sex. This is porn. They're two totally different things.
Yeah, I think in both cases, that what you've sort of highlighted and what we, by doing this podcast, sort of trip over again and again, is that there's this just huge education gap around sex, the subject of sex, and you know, all that entails. So whether it's porn, whether it's our own bodies, you know, from the clitoris to the urethra, or, you know, to the hymen, to all of these things, it's, you know, discharge, the whole thing. We need to get better at education. But I also feel like, for me personally, you know, my sex education wasn't great, but doing this work now, it's like education doesn't have to stop. You can just keep learning. You know, it doesn't matter that I'm in my 40s now. I'm having a great time learning all this new stuff. Maybe it would have been better if I'd learned it when I was a teenage boy, but you know.
I think the basics. It would have been better if we'd all learnt the basics, and we felt better about ourselves. We understood consent more, and we didn't see sex as something quite how we see it. But I think also as an adult, you enjoy learning. I mean, I think some kids do, but like I was all right at school, but I wasn't like, oh, I want to learn more. It's like I just have to because I'm at school. Whereas now as an adult, it's like, yeah, I want to learn more about this. This is really interesting. And I think, life is always about learning. So, I think it doesn't matter what age you are, whether you're 15 or 50, like learning about all of this stuff it's exciting. And also we're learning more stuff all the time anyway. So like the clitoris wasn't like properly mapped out until... I think it was like 98 or something, and it was only last year that they discovered how many nerve endings it really had, because before that we were using a study that had been done on a cow clitoris that didn't have any relevance to a human clitoris at all. So you know, you're just constantly learning new things, which I mean, the clitoris is just, I mean, it was taken out of Grey's Anatomy. Like, it was just removed because they thought, like, oh, this isn't useful information. We don't need to know about this. And it's like, that's absolutely bonkers. Like, it's just, And a lot of it it's a double-edged sword of, like, it being from the Victorian era in Britain of, like, sex is disgusting. Sex is something that is just sort of between a husband and a wife, and we don't talk about it, and it's all very one way of doing it, which affects all of us. And then there's the other aspect of like of being a woman, of being this kind of dichotomy of either being like the Madonna or the whore thing, like you're either this sort of saintly, lovely mother, or you're some sort of sexy slut that has sex with everybody and has no morals. But also women's bodies are seen as dirty and as kind of like we're hysterical and we've got there's all these things that are wrong with us and that are abnormal and are different from the male, and that's seen as bad rather than, oh, they're different from the male, this is so interesting. It's like, oh, it's different from the male, that must mean it's weaker, it's lesser. And you know, that does affect everybody too, but it affects women to a much greater extent, and I think that's why the vulva has been so neglected. You know, we learn a lot more about the penis and the testicles than we do about the vulva still, and it's it is a more complex structure. But it's 2023, like we shouldn't be. I don't know. I just think it's bonkers. We shouldn't still be discovering stuff about it that seems quite basic.
So, from all this, like personally, what's the most like rewarding side of this for you? Like, would you say?
So the most rewarding side of it is the comments I get from people about how they now feel about their body. I kind of screen grab them all and save them in a little folder so that when I'm feeling a bit low or feeling like, oh, what am I doing? Instagram is just like, I've gone from like 4,000 likes on a post 18 months ago to 150 because Instagram is so censoring everything. So the things that keep me going are messages from people who have said things like, oh, you know, I now feel so comfortable with my vulva that I let my partner go down on me, whereas before I wouldn't because I was worried that they would think it was ugly or dirty. To things like I'm now able to have an orgasm because I'm no longer stressing about what my vulva looks like, or like that woman who said, I've just realised that, you know, I'm normal after all these years. Like, they're the things I think, oh, good, like this is a positive change in the world. And I think education can never be underestimated. I mean, education is just the key to everything. It's the key to understanding ourselves and our lives and feeling happier and being able to have made those sorts of differences in people's lives is incredible and is so humbling. And every time I get one of those messages, it sort of makes me think like, oh yeah, this isn't just me putting an image on Instagram. This is helping making people feel happier. And I can't think of anything better to spend your life doing than to help make people feel happier.
Absolutely. And when you think about some of the stuff you mentioned in the book and talked about at the beginning, was just, some of the stats, some of the sort of heartbreaking stats. I guess if even any of what you're doing is pushing against those, then, amazing. The other interesting thing is, for me, just circling back to I'll put my dad hat on for a minute, is this the education that I'm getting, through doing all this, finding stuff out and stuff like that. I can only really see that that's a good thing to, pass on bits of to my daughter. It's there's a lot, isn't there, like appropriate age to talk to children about their bodies and things like that. And there's again a whole different podcast probably to talk about all that. But I think that it has to start with your personal journey before you can pass that on, I guess.
Because you need to feel comfortable talking about these things and understanding them, so that you can then pass on that confidence to your children. When we're sort of, not using correct terminology, we're teaching our children that the thing is so naughty and embarrassing that we can't even use its real name because we must hide behind some sort of nickname for it. And that's quite dangerous. And I just think the word vulva has been it's been seen as some sort of dirty word or sexualized. And actually, we can talk about the vulva without talking about sex. Like, the vulva is there for other things as well as sex, just like the penis. We can talk about the penis for other things, but for some reason the vulva just doesn't get the same respect, I think. And it comes as a parent. I mean, I'm not a parent and I don't plan to be a parent, but I do feel it's a responsibility of a parent to be able to pass on that confidence in your body to your children, and to not be ashamed of any part of your body, whether that's your stomach or your boobs or your face or your hair or your genitals. And that's important. That's a really important part of teaching your children, so that when they grow up they'll be happier, I think. And I think we all want our children to be happy and to feel safe and confident. And I think, if you teach people that their vulva is theirs, and other people can't touch it or talk about it without their consent, then that's fantastic. At the moment, that's not really being taught to some children when it's being called, a cookie or a nunu or a mini or whatever. All these, we've come up with hundreds of different words to name the vulva, and we've not done the same for penises. We've only got a couple of penis, dick, cock, willy. That's kind of it. And yet I could honestly sit here for 5 minutes and reel off hundreds of names that we've got for the vulva, because we're too embarrassed just to use the word vulva. And there have been studies that have shown that for children that use a nickname for a vulva, sort of like cookie or mini or foo-foo, then they can be more perceptible to, or more likely to experience like sexual abuse when they're young, because they don't have the correct terminology. So if your daughter came home from school and said, my teacher touched my cookie, you'd just be thinking, just eat the cookie or get another cookie. Like, what? I don't know what the problem is.
Yeah.
But if cookie is the name that your daughter has been using for vulva and you've just missed that, then that's that's huge. So I just think it's really important, and I just don't. You're just passing on the shame. You're just passing on the embarrassment by not referring to it as it is. We don't have another name for an elbow or another name for an eyelid. Why have we got another name for vulvas that we need to use?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's ridiculous. Amazing. We will wrap this up. Thank you heaps for struggling on with this slightly dodgy internet connection. But I think we've nailed it. It'll be flawless. No one will ever know.
Yeah. I can't wait to see the editing.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, it's going to be great. Really hope you enjoyed that one. You can check out more of Jo, the Vulva Gallery, and her book, and more at thisisavulva.com. Before we sign off, we want to remind you to check out our book, available at sexandspace.com/book, to download or buy. Don't forget to leave us a like, follow, comment, or review wherever you're tuning in from. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, safe travels, and see you on the next episode.